He does have autism, and that's another part of it. So when we first got his diagnosis, they told us that developmental delays were normal.
Autism is not a developmental delay. You need to fix your terminology or understand it, please. Please fix your terminology.
So, and I don't even know, he's got level, I don't even know.
That's actually a good thing because levels are useless and harmful and completely inaccurate.
I think autism. But that's just one part of it. So it's, yeah. And I just want to say this to the autism people out there is, and I always like to put this out because I know I have a lot of people that have autism that follow me.
We're autistic, Katie. We don't have autism. We're autistic. We're not autism people.
Level 1 or level 2 or level 3 or whatever level you are on the spectrum. When you have to call someone high functioning or low functioning, it actually like minimizes the person's capabilities.
You're right here as well. Functioning levels are crap, but so are the levels. They don't represent a person. They don't represent anything that you're about to try and explain, and I will try to clarify the actual facts after we listen a little more.
Someone who's considered low functioning, it's almost like you're telling that person's parent that like that child isn't worth it. They're never going to accomplish anything, that you're going to like limit their possibilities, and you're going to diminish their experiences. Super sweet. The other thing they always say is, you said that your son could be a murderer. That's actually not what I said. We were talking about Nicholas Godejohn, who was involved with Gypsy Blanchard and how he had autism. And we were talking about the vulnerability and the manipulation of people that have low IQs and how they can be manipulated into doing things if they're surrounded by the wrong people.
That's not true. You were not talking about people with low IQs or people who had learning difficulties. You were talking about autistic people. Autistic people, not anything to do with IQ.
The example I gave in that same experience was of a family member that we have that has disabilities, and he was at school, and the children at school bullied him and told him that he needed to eat paper out of the garbage can. And he had no one else around him, and so he started eating paper out of the garbage can. When someone has an intellectual disability or a cognitive disability, if they're not around the right people, they can be influenced wrongly.
Again, I don't disagree here, but that was not what you were talking about. You were speaking specifically about autistic people. And now you're implying that autistic people all have intellectual disabilities or delays, like you like to say.
Advantage of. And so they can end up in situations where they're manipulated into committing crime. It's harder for them, it takes them longer to process things, and it's also easier to manipulate them. So given the wrong person, they're preyed on, which is why they're protected. And they have to be protected. I said that autism equates to low IQ. I was talking about my specific situation, and a lot of children, just because you guys see a cute quote that says that savants are autism, if you actually look at the statistics, the majority of children with autism actually don't have high IQs. Some do. Savants are less than 10% of the whole population. It's a spectrum.
Also true. It is a spectrum, but it's also a spectrum within each individual who is autistic. Hence, functioning labels being ridiculously inaccurate.
If a child is classified at level 2 or below, so 2 or 3, they have an intellectual disability.
This is wildly inaccurate. The labels that are given, the levels 1, 2, and 3, have nothing to do with intellect. They have nothing to do with functioning. They are to represent levels of support required. And they're strictly for funding purposes and resources. While I still think they're stupid and they should stop using them, if you're gonna talk about them, at least know what you're talking about. 1, 2, and 3 represent levels of support that the doctor, the government, whoever does the funding, deems this person will require in their life. Which is why they're so stupid and useless, because these things can fluctuate from day to day, from minute to minute, from week to week. And a person's level of support required will change depending on the circumstances, the environment, their mood, their stimulation level. Some people can be verbal one day, nonverbal the next. You have to stop saying this. This isn't true. The levels are not about intellect. They're not about IQ.
Meaning their IQ is less than 60. And then other kids are in the borderline where they're between 60 and 80. And then there's other kids that have normal IQs. Again, a spectrum.
Again, not correct. And this is even more ridiculous to be spouting as fact when you're literally giving wrong facts. But keep in mind, IQ tests are designed for neurotypical people. The results that you get from an IQ test given to an autistic person are skewed. They are not a true representative of that child or that adult, that person's actual intelligence level, because they are made for neurotypicals, not neurodivergent people, which is what autistic people are.
And people that have borderline intellectual impairment are very vulnerable. Brendan, yeah. So it's like Brendan from To Make a Murderer. That's how I was trying to classify it when I was speaking about that. Like, yes, he could have been manipulated because of his lower IQ.
Except that's not what you said. You specifically spoke on people who are autistic, not people who have low IQs or intellectual disabilities or any of this stuff that you're talking about right now, which is not related to autism.
Yes, and Kathleen has autism and she has a high IQ, but people that have high IQs with autism have their own struggles because they still have to deal with the sensory overload. They still have to deal with how they process things. They still have to deal with all the stimuli. The people that have higher IQs in their own right struggle because they're forced to conform to be what you.
This is called masking, Katie. Masking. It's called living in a world that is designed for people who are neurotypical. And in a world where society wants people who are not neurotypical to work as though they are. Thankfully, accommodations and understanding are becoming more common, and we're forced less to be less autistic to survive in this world. But yeah, she's right. Masking is a thing. Masking causes burnout. It causes shutdown. Autistic shutdown is something that's incredibly serious and is the reason why there's such a high percentage of young adults who are autistic deciding that they can't do it anymore. But this isn't limited to those of us with high IQs or high functioning or level 1. It has nothing to do with that. These things affect every autistic at whatever level they're at.
But they can't be because they have autism, so they get burnout because they learn how to like be less autistic at school or at work, and then they get home and they can have what's called autistic meltdown or autistic burnout meltdown, which happens a lot because the kids have to like do everything that they can to stay like, okay, at school I have to be good, at school I can't do this, at school I can't do that. And so then they get home and then it's like meltdown city.
This is also not untrue. She's, in her own way, explaining quite well the phenomena of getting to a safe place or a safe person and being able to just let go. And it does, it happens all the time. You see it with kids in school, you see it with adults coming home from work. When you're forced to mask and keep it together all day and suppress who you are and not stim and not be too autistic and not be too noticeable and not misbehave, you get home and you've done that all day and you're done. And she's not wrong about that. I just wish that she would stop putting IQ and intelligence together with autism, because the two do not go together.
Again, that population is not the spectrum is huge. So yes, some kids can have very high IQs, but not all do. And yes, some kids do have high IQs and are very smart. Others are not, or don't have as high of IQ. That's not like being mean about your child. And I'm not saying lower high functioning. She got mad at me because I said I was trying to classify lower high functioning. I'm actually just explaining the spectrum. Here's the deal. Some people have higher IQs, but they still struggle. Other people have intellectual disabilities and other issues. It's a spectrum.
It's a spectrum for everybody in the world, Katie. People have higher or lower intelligence, whether they're autistic or not, but you keep putting them in the same context when they are not related. Statistically, most autistics are of average intelligence or slightly higher. The Google statistics that you'll find out there are irrelevant because they're based on standardized tests that are all designed for neurotypical people and can never truly measure intelligence in someone who does not fit that mold. I'm going to play some of the clip that she's referencing here so you can see that I'm not just talking through my butt, and that she definitely implied that autistic people can be manipulated into committing crimes.
Well, I think they played up on Nick's autism and made him look way more innocent than he is.
He is absolutely developmentally delayed and should not be in prison.
Not as much as people.
No, Katie, he's autistic, not developmentally delayed.
Not as much as people think.
That is really, the specialists have all contradicted themselves. When you read emails that he does, he is intelligent.
But that doesn't, you can be intelligent and autistic.
No, autistic, absolutely. No, not the same, no.
But he's not developmentally slow in any means, no.
But autism is considered a developmental disability.
It is a neurodevelopmental disorder, and yes, it is discovered, found, develops, whatever you want to look at, during the developmental period of a person's life, which is why it's considered developmental. That doesn't mean anything about intelligence, and it doesn't mean delay.
It's considered a neurological disability.
No, it affects all aspects of development.
The word to describe what you're talking about now is pervasive. And there was a time when autism was actually called pervasive developmental disorder, PDD, which is not really an accurate term anymore, and they don't use it, just like they don't use Asperger, they don't use a lot of things anymore. However, that's not what developmental disability or disorder means. It means that it occurs during development or is diagnosed during development. It can't just, like, all of a sudden as an adult you cannot become autistic. And as far as they know or assume, it's not congenital, meaning not in the womb, which there's actually debate over that now at this point. People are born autistic.
My son is autistic, so
do you believe that your son could be manipulated into murdering somebody?
yes.
You do.
Yes.
Why? And how? And where is your son at on the spectrum?
He's high functioning.
he's high functioning. Why do you think that that could happen?
Because they're vulnerable.
Because that you're actually the first one that we've talked to that has said that.
I think anyone that has autism can be manipulated because they're vulnerable.
You do.
Yes. I think anyone that has autism can be manipulated because they're vulnerable.
So there you have it, the actual words. The deflection in more recent videos has been clear, and just to be completely 100% clear here, Katie is not the only person who has these assumptions about autistic people. There is so much misinformation out there. As the mother of an autistic child, Katie, I would expect better. I would expect advocacy. I would never expect this. And being autistic does not make a person exempt from being an asshole, just so you know, or being a criminal. It has nothing to do with the autism. And neither does intelligence. Personality and intelligence can vary in all people, autistic or not. Instead of doubling down and deflecting and trying to change the past, admit that you were misinformed, that you made errors. People are a lot more forgiving when you do that than when you deny, avoid, deflect, and gaslight, which is what you were doing in the first clips that I shared here. I hope I've done this justice. It's actually a lot of emotional labor to correct misinformation, and there's so much more that I would like to talk about. I just literally don't have it in me at this point. If anybody does have any questions or need clarification, please reach out. I'm perfectly happy to attempt to explain things better. I don't always articulate the best, but I do try. This video was not intended to jump on the Katie Joy hate train because, as you know, that's not a train that I want to be on. I've already talked before about people who make things up and lie and exaggerate and grab onto every little thing to try to villainize Katie, and that's not what I'm about. But in this case, education was necessary, and I just wish that she would grasp onto it rather than avoid it, block, and deny.